Imagine walking through the African landscape and suddenly seeing this. Massive stone walls rising above the grass, towers, passages, enclosures, and structures built without modern cement. This isn't a European castle. It isn't a Roman ruin. It stands in southern Africa, and for centuries it was part of one of Africa's most remarkable civilizations. When European explorers and colonial settlers encountered these ruins, some struggled to believe that African people had built them. Stories were invented. Foreign civilizations were proposed. Ancient outsiders were credited. But archaeology would eventually tell a very different story. The people who built Great Zimbabwe were African. Great Zimbabwe wasn't simply a collection of abandoned stones. It was the center of a powerful society, a place where people lived, traded, worked, worshipped, and governed. At its height, thousands of people lived in and around the settlement, and its influence reached far beyond these walls. The name itself is connected to the Shona word Zimbabwe, often understood as referring to a stone house or stone enclosure. And stone was everywhere. But the real story wasn't simply about stone. It was about the society capable of organizing the people, skills, resources, and knowledge needed to build with it. So who built this extraordinary city? How did it become wealthy? Why did people travel from distant regions to trade here? And perhaps most importantly, why was the truth about Great Zimbabwe disputed for so long? To understand Great Zimbabwe, we have to forget the ruins for a moment. Imagine this land hundreds of years ago. There were farmers raising cattle, craftsmen working with iron and stone, families living in settlements, traders moving goods across the region, and communities developing their own political and cultural systems. This was the world from which Great Zimbabwe emerged. Archaeological evidence shows that Great Zimbabwe was founded around the 11th century. Over generations, the settlement expanded. Buildings became more substantial, stone walls appeared, and the community grew into something much larger. By the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe had become the principal city of a powerful state in a region rich in gold. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a palace surrounded by empty land. It was a complex settlement. Archaeological remains reveal different kinds of living spaces, including areas associated with elite communities and settlements in the valleys. The people farmed. They kept livestock. They produced goods, and they built. Above the surrounding landscape stood the hill ruins. The granite hill contained layers of occupation dating back centuries. Narrow passages and stone enclosures were built into the natural rock. Archaeologists generally interpret parts of this area as having had royal and ritual importance. But exactly how every space was used remains a subject of archaeological interpretation. Then there was the Great Enclosure, an enormous elliptical stone structure built from carefully laid granite blocks. Inside were living spaces, community areas, and a narrow passage leading toward a tall conical tower. The precision of the stonework is one of the reasons Great Zimbabwe remains such an extraordinary archaeological achievement. UNESCO describes the Great Enclosure as a 14th century structure built from cut granite blocks laid in regular courses. And then archaeology revealed something that made the story even more fascinating. Great Zimbabwe was connected to a much wider world. Archaeologists have found objects from distant regions, including glass beads and Chinese and Persian ceramics. Gold and Arab coins associated with Kilwa have also been found. These discoveries provide evidence of long-distance trade. UNESCO lists imported glass beads, porcelain from China and Persia, and gold and Arab coins from Kilwa among the archaeological evidence for Great Zimbabwe's extensive trade connections. At its height, Great Zimbabwe was no small settlement. UNESCO estimates that its population exceeded 10,000 people. Think about that. More than 10,000 people living in and around a major medieval African center surrounded by extraordinary stone architecture connected to regional and long-distance trade. Great Zimbabwe was not waiting for history to begin. It was already making history. But a great city needs more than walls. It needs food, workers, resources, political organization, and trade. So how did Great Zimbabwe become wealthy enough to support such a remarkable center? Where did its wealth come from? And who was buying the goods that came from this land? To answer that, we have to follow the gold. The Zimbabwean plateau was rich in resources. Among the most valuable was gold. Gold was mined in the surrounding region and became an important part of the economy. But gold alone doesn't build a city. People needed food, cattle, tools, crafts, and networks connecting producers to distant markets. It is tempting to imagine Great Zimbabwe as a city built entirely around gold. But archaeology suggests a much more complex economy. People farmed crops, they raised cattle, they made pottery and tools, they worked with stone and metal, and these activities supported the communities living around the city. But Great Zimbabwe's influence extended far beyond the surrounding countryside. Goods moved through networks stretching toward the eastern coast of Africa. Traders connected inland communities with ports along the Indian Ocean, and through those networks, objects from distant parts of the world eventually reached Great Zimbabwe. On the coast, ports such as Kilwa were connected to a vast Indian Ocean trading world. African, Arab, Persian, Indian, and other merchants participated in these networks. Great Zimbabwe was part of this wider system through trade routes linking the interior to the coast. The city was inland, but it was not isolated, and trade moved in both directions. Archaeologists have found imported objects at Great Zimbabwe, including glass beads and ceramics from distant regions. These objects are more than decorations. They are clues. They tell us that people living here were participating in economic networks that stretched far beyond southern Africa. Trade also depended on local skill. Great Zimbabwe's people were not simply receiving goods from elsewhere. They produced goods of their own: pottery, metalwork, stonework, and objects that reflected their own culture and craftsmanship. Among the most famous objects associated with Great Zimbabwe are the stone birds. Carved from soapstone, these sculptures have become powerful symbols of Zimbabwe. Their exact meaning remains debated, but their craftsmanship tells us something important. The people of Great Zimbabwe created sophisticated artistic objects that carried cultural and possibly religious significance. Great Zimbabwe's importance wasn't simply that it possessed valuable resources. It was the ability to bring together people, production, political authority, craftsmanship, agriculture, livestock, and trade. That's what turns a settlement into a major center of power. But there was something else about Great Zimbabwe that made it extraordinary. The walls. Massive walls built without mortar, carefully fitted stones rising higher than a person, and an enormous enclosure whose purpose continues to fascinate archaeologists. How did they build it? Look closely at these walls. There is something remarkable about them. The stones were carefully laid without conventional mortar holding them together. Instead, the builders relied on carefully selected and positioned granite blocks. Layer after layer, stone after stone, until the walls became enormous structures that have survived for centuries. Now imagine the problem facing the builders. There were no modern cranes, no trucks, no power tools, no concrete mixers. Yet enormous quantities of stone had to be collected, shaped, transported, and positioned. That required knowledge, organization, and a tremendous amount of human labor. The builders had an advantage. Granite was available in the surrounding landscape. The stone could be split along natural lines and shaped into blocks suitable for construction. The result was a building tradition that used the landscape itself as a source of material. And then we reach the Great Enclosure. Its massive curved wall stretches for hundreds of meters. Inside stands the famous conical tower. The structure is one of the defining features of Great Zimbabwe. But what was it actually used for? Archaeologists have proposed different interpretations, and that's important. Not every mystery has a confirmed answer. So why did they build walls this large? Were they defensive? Did they separate social spaces? Were they connected to political power or ritual activities? Archaeology provides clues, but there isn't one simple answer that explains every wall at Great Zimbabwe. But there's something we can say with confidence. A project of this scale required organization. Someone had to coordinate workers. Someone had to manage resources. Someone had to decide where structures would be built. And generations of people had to maintain the knowledge required to construct them. These walls are therefore more than architecture. They are evidence of a complex society. But Great Zimbabwe wasn't only about walls. Archaeologists also discovered remarkable soapstone sculptures, including the famous Zimbabwe Birds. Their exact meaning isn't certain, but they show that the people of Great Zimbabwe were also producing sophisticated art and symbolic objects. Centuries later, these birds would become one of the most recognizable symbols associated with Zimbabwe. A symbol created in a medieval African society eventually became part of the identity of a modern nation. The past didn't disappear, it became part of the future. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe flourished, but eventually the city declined. People left, trade patterns changed, and the great settlement became largely abandoned. But its story didn't end when its inhabitants left. In fact, that was when another chapter began. When Europeans encountered the ruins centuries later, they saw something they didn't expect to find in Africa. And instead of asking, "What African society built this?" some asked, "Who else could have built it?" By the late 19th century, Europeans were becoming increasingly aware of the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, but they didn't encounter them with a blank mind. Colonial expansion was already reshaping southern Africa, and many European writers carried assumptions about what African societies were and were not capable of building. Instead of beginning with the simplest question, "Who lived here?" some early European writers asked a different question. Which civilization from somewhere else built this? The ruins were sometimes attributed to outsiders, from ancient Phoenicians to Arabs and other imagined connections. These theories reflected the racial and colonial assumptions of the time more than the archaeological evidence. The idea that Africans could not have built Great Zimbabwe became deeply embedded in some colonial-era interpretations. This wasn't simply an academic disagreement. It mattered because archaeology was being used to construct stories about Africa itself. If Africans had built sophisticated cities, organized long-distance trade, and monumental architecture, then the idea that Africa had no complex civilizations before European intervention simply couldn't stand. But archaeology doesn't depend on what someone wants to believe. It depends on evidence. Excavations uncovered pottery, tools, beads, animal remains, architectural remains, and other material evidence connected to the communities who lived there. Over time, archaeological research established what the evidence had increasingly pointed toward. Great Zimbabwe was built and occupied by African societies in southern Africa. The evidence doesn't give us every answer. We don't know the name of every ruler. We don't know exactly how every building was used, and we shouldn't pretend that we do. But we know enough to understand something extraordinary. Great Zimbabwe was the product of complex African society, culture, architecture, agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade. So why does this matter today? Because when history is misunderstood, the damage doesn't stay in the past. A false story about the past can shape how people think about a continent in the present. If generations are taught that African civilization only became sophisticated after Europeans arrived, they may never learn about the societies that existed long before colonial rule. But there is a lesson here that goes beyond Great Zimbabwe. History isn't supposed to be protected from new evidence. When evidence challenges an old story, the story should change. That's how knowledge works. And sometimes the most important discoveries aren't about finding something new. They're about finally seeing something that was there all along. But there is still one major question. If Great Zimbabwe was such an important center, if its population was so large, if it was connected to valuable trade networks, why did people eventually leave? What happened to the city? The city had survived for centuries, but no civilization remains unchanged forever. The reasons Great Zimbabwe declined are still debated, and the real answer may be more complicated than a single disaster. Great Zimbabwe had flourished for centuries, but around the 15th century, the center began to decline. People gradually moved away from the settlement. Trade patterns changed, and the political importance of Great Zimbabwe began to shift. But there wasn't one dramatic event that we can confidently point to and say, this is exactly what destroyed the city. One possible factor was trade. Great Zimbabwe's importance was closely connected to regional and long-distance economic networks. When those networks changed, the city's position could change with them. Other centers began becoming more important. Economic power was shifting. Environmental pressures may also have played a role. A large population requires food, water, fuel, and grazing land. When a major settlement grows for generations, pressure on surrounding resources can increase. But again, we shouldn't turn a complex historical process into a simple story of environmental collapse. The evidence suggests a combination of factors rather than one easy answer. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is this: the people didn't simply vanish. Societies move, communities reorganize, political centers rise and fall, trade routes change. People carry their skills, traditions, beliefs, and languages with them. The end of Great Zimbabwe as a major political center wasn't the end of the people who built it. Over time, the once busy center became quiet. Grass grew around the walls, paths disappeared, buildings collapsed, and eventually what had once been a living city became what we now call an archaeological site. But the city didn't truly disappear. Its walls survived, its artifacts survived, its architecture survived. And eventually, archaeology helped recover a history that had been misunderstood for generations. Today, Great Zimbabwe stands as one of the most important archaeological sites in Africa. And perhaps Great Zimbabwe leaves us with a lesson that goes beyond archaeology. Sometimes history isn't lost because nobody remembers. Sometimes it's lost because people tell the wrong story about what they see. The walls were always there. The craftsmanship was always there. The evidence was always there. What changed was our willingness to listen to it. Great Zimbabwe reminds us that history belongs to evidence, not assumptions. 1,000 years from now, someone may look at the buildings we leave behind. They may wonder who we were, what we believed, what we created, and why our civilization changed. They'll have to search for the evidence, just as we do today. So when you see the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, don't just see stones, see a city, see its builders, see its traders, see its families, see its achievements, and remember that Africa's history was never empty. It was always there.